Welcome to the Authentic Living and Loving channel, where we feature stories about individuals that are living to the beat of their own drum, doing things a bit out of the ordinary, living authentically and inspiring others to do the same. My name is Dr. Jordan Alexander, and today I'm so pleased that we have Jess Stuart with us. Now, Jess is an author, she's a coach, she's a speaker, and she helps busy, high-achieving women find more time. Who doesn't need more time? She helps them reprioritize what matters and build resilience. She shows us today how to beat overwhelm, keep calm in chaos, and realize our own potential. Jess has been a highly acclaimed event speaker. She's been featured on all kinds of TV and radio around the globe. She organizes not-for-profit events to inspire, empower, and motivate women. And as an author, her latest book, which we'll hear about today, is called Like a Girl. And it's all about uncovering your brilliance and thriving at life. Jess has a passion for sharing her knowledge and motivating others with her words. I am so thrilled, Jess, to have you on the show today. And I know that others are going to want to hear about your tips for uncovering their own brilliance. Joining us today from Mapuia in New Zealand, welcome, Jess.
Thank you, Jordan. It's great to be here. Great to be with you.
Fabulous. Now, Jess, I want to hear so many things about your, how you started, where you came from, all of those things. But right now, first, and the hottest topic right now today seems to be imposter syndrome. So maybe you could just share with us a little bit about what is it and why do we need to worry about it?
Yeah, sure. It's a great place to start. It's one of the things since Like a Girl came out that I've been asked the most. The thing I keep being asked to speak about. It appeared as a chapter in the book, but it's the one thing that's resonated with so many people, and I think that just shows that there's so much of it out there. And for those that are not aware of imposter syndrome or haven't heard the term before, it is this concept that describes high achieving individuals that don't have the ability to internalize their accomplishments. So we tend to wave away our praise and acknowledgement. We tend to think that success isn't real when we've achieved it. It's not because we're good. And above all, we tend to worry that we're going to get found out, that people around us are going to find out that we're not as good as they think we are. And that's, of course, where the imposter term comes from.
So this is all about, 20 years into a career, you're at the top of your game according to other people, but you're still thinking, if I show up tomorrow at work, are they going to think, we discovered she's not who she said she was?
Yeah, that's often what it sounds like. And you're right, you can be in your career for 20 years, but when you're getting promoted, you're getting more challenges. The irony is the higher up you go, a lot of the time, the louder this voice can become because it is the domain of high achievers. So normally it's when we are being successful that our brain starts to doubt either our worthiness of that or whether it is real success and are we really as successful as those around us give us credit for.
So Jess, that's got to be really debilitating. And I guess creates a lot of anxiety and angst about, what happens if I've got this imposter syndrome?
So it's like a nagging self-doubt that exists in our mind. So what that can mean is we will play it safe to avoid rejection or to avoid getting it wrong. We might not apply for the promotion, so we can't not get it. We can't get found out. It might mean as well that we have this constant ability to undermine ourselves. So despite the success and what's actually happening in reality in our mind, we are second guessing ourselves and trying not to get found out and just spending so much time and energy on something that actually isn't real because it only exists in our mind.
Right. So this sort of area, I mean, I can see, especially with the busyness and the technology and all the things going on right now in our world, that this must be ramping up. So what made you get into the whole empowering women side of things? I wonder if you could just take us back a little bit to a younger Jess, and how did you get here? Share a little bit about your background, and it's not a Kiwi accent we hear, so maybe help us with understanding that.
Yeah, totally. New Zealand's been my home for the last 8 years. It is my home. This is where I live. I'm originally from the UK, which is where all my family are, and I grew up in the UK, quite a rural part of England, and I did a lot of work. My career was in human resources. So I've always done a lot of work with people. And as I progressed through my own HR career, I got the privilege to work with a lot of leaders across many different industries. I worked in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. And there were some recurring themes that I started to pick up. Themes around what good looked like, but what held us back, and how so many of us had this potential within us that we were not realizing. And so that's what really sparked my interest. And there was a real parallel between my own experiences coming up through the corporate ranks and progressing my own career, and then starting my own business and writing books, mirrored in what I saw, particularly around other women. And I always, I talk from my own experience, and obviously being a woman, that gives me, I'm best equipped to talk about women as opposed to men. And there were some recurring themes, particularly around imposter syndrome, particularly around our self-doubt, but particularly around in the workplace, what good looks like and where our confidence is and how we can leverage our strengths and skills more. And so much of what I experienced myself, I was seeing in other women. And I've had the privilege of working with so many great women. And it just amazed me the amount of them who doubted their own ability, who didn't see how great they were. And that's really what sort of sparked my passion to look into this a bit more, but then wanting to give people the tools and tricks and techniques to help offset some of that and help really sort of peel back the layers, and for women to be able to see themselves through other people's eyes, because so often when we look through our own lens, it's a lot harsher and it's not often as in line with reality. So helping people realize their potential, see what's in them, and then be able to have the confidence to believe in that as well.
So Jess, you're a successful author. You're a coach now. You're doing a lot of inspirational speaking. What were some of the barriers you had to overcome? Did you have imposter syndrome? What were some of the things going on in your head? And just so that people can kind of relate to the almost like the Jenny Craig before and after,
Totally. Yeah. And there's so many different iterations of that. It's really interesting when I talk about how my sort of the business I'm in now, my own business, how that evolved. I almost call myself an accidental expert in imposter syndrome. I never expected to be in this space. I never expected to be a speaker. I was a writer, and I'm an introvert by nature. So I love sitting behind my desk writing books. And when I started to be asked to speak about the content within those books, I always relay a story when I'm holding a mic at a conference, and I'll say to the people in the audience, I talk about fear a lot and our comfort zone, and I'll relay, for the first year of speaking, I couldn't use a handheld mic because my hands would shake so much because of the fear. And it took a long while to get over that and to learn. And obviously, as with anything, the more we do it, the more comfortable we become and the more confident we get, because we prove to ourselves we can do it. And I think for me, I look at imposter syndrome and the various times it's come in my career. And I always say to people, it's one of those things that never really goes away. It just rears its head sometimes when we're not expecting it. And for me, certainly, as I made my way up the corporate career ranks and was getting promotions, I left school quite early. I didn't stay at university. I didn't get a degree. And that was one of the things for me that was when I was sitting around this leadership table full of all these really intelligent people, often with more than one degree, I would feel inferior because of my lack of degree, despite the fact that I'd earned my place at that table. And then later on, writing books, who's going to read them? Who are you to pose as an expert in this subject? And similarly speaking, every time you get to do something new and get outside of your comfort zone, it tends to be where these feelings of self-doubt can creep in and try and tell us that you're not the right person to be doing this, or you're going to get found out, you're not as good as people think you are. So it's one of those things. It's very prevalent in lots of successful people. I think the statistics are around 70%, and this is regardless of gender, that 70% of us suffer from imposter syndrome at some point. So it's sort of not surprising that it does rear its head in my career too, and still does now. There was a conference I spoke at a while ago, and I sort of delivered my well-worn keynote and asked for any questions, and there was a deathly silence. And it was interesting watching in my mind the imposter syndrome creep in then. Did they like it? Have you got it too polished? Was it not authentic enough? Until I got the feedback from that conference that said you were the highest performing presenter of the day based on the rankings the attendees give you at the end. But it wasn't until I got that feedback that I was able to offset some of that self-doubt that had crept into my mind, even then, presenting that very topic.
So Jess, is it something that, I mean, it doesn't sound like we fix it then, like it sounds like this, it's like this, this never ending, like Linus in the Peanuts, he had that cloud that followed him around, um, it, are there good days and bad days? Is it something we just have to live with, or are there things that we can do to sort of keep it in its box?
There's definitely things we can do to help it. There will always be times that it creeps up on us. A lot of the time, if we've had a year off work to have our children and we go back to the workplace and things have changed, that can be a time where we don't feel as confident as we would normally. Equally, if we're getting a promotion or we're doing something new in a new relationship, all of these things give rise to these feelings of self-doubt. But I think I always liken it to a volume control on your stereo. You can turn it up or down, and there's certain techniques and tips that you can use to offset imposter syndrome, as opposed to sort of eradicate it completely, because I'm not quite sure that that's something I can attest to having discovered.
So Jess, if we just go back to your example of being a speaker, so and I have a guru sort of business mentor, and he talks about that, Ben Harvey. He talks about expanding.
Mhm.
Instead of saying, I'm nervous about things, oh, I'm having an opportunity for expanding. And so I guess, is there something that you tell yourself before you go on stage, or, because it can be kind of a freak out fear thing and almost debilitate you from being able to speak. So what are the things that you
Mm.
personally do to actually keep it in check for that speech?
Mm. There's a number of things, and it works with any form of imposter syndrome. And that can be using mantras and affirmations. So for me, before I go on stage, it's always, I'm calm, confident, and capable. They're the words I repeat over and over in my head until I feel like that's what I'm embodying and that's what becomes true. It's also really important for me to keep feedback and success stories so that I can revisit them and sort of almost see the evidence that offsets that voice that tells us we're not good enough. So I think it's really important for people we're not very good, particularly in New Zealand, at looking at our successes or talking about our successes. So we do tend to wave them away and be quite modest about that stuff. But when imposter syndrome is concerned, it's really important to offset those feelings, that we are aware of our successes, we reflect on them, but we also revisit them as well. So for me, before I go and speak in front of a big audience, being able to look back at past feedback I've had that said, this is really good, it's made a difference in my life, this is how it's changed me, gives me the evidence that then says, you know this stuff, you can do this, and people appreciate it, and that's why you do it. And that then gives me the confidence to know that I can go out on stage and it's not something new. I've done it hundreds of times, and that people do enjoy it.
Fantastic. I mean, you mentioned something that's really interesting about New Zealand. I mean, I'm originally from Canada, but I've lived here for 25 years. You've been here for 8 years. I mean, one of the things that I found really fascinating in the business world is the whole tall poppy syndrome. And you talk about people wanting to sort of low key their achievements, and having a lot of Pacifica cultures in New Zealand as
Mm,
well. I've noticed that that's even in interview situations, you're trying to say to someone, well, what did you do in that project? And it's just a cultural trait to downplay it. You overlay that with New Zealand tall poppy, get your head chopped off if you're too loud and obnoxious. This
yeah.
is me toned down. So what are you finding in New Zealand, as compared to what you had in the UK and Australia?
Yeah, culture plays a huge part, and it's true. I always liken it to a perfect storm. You've got the waving away of success that comes with imposter syndrome, and then our tall poppy fears, that is that perfect storm that goes together, which means that we never end up talking about our successes. And then when we do, we feel like we're boasting, particularly in New Zealand. I think it's similar in the UK. I always, I always say that the UK, it's less tall poppy and more all poppy, and that you just want everyone to fail, not just the people that are good at what they do. Australia, less so. Australia, there seems to be a lot more confidence around that stuff, from what I've observed in Australia. But it's something that I think exists within all of us. We're not conditioned to talk about our achievements, and therefore we play them down. We're quite modest about what we've done. But also we have in our brain, our brains are more predisposed to look for the negative, or to pick out the things we're not good at, or what didn't go so well. So with that as well combined, we have to try really hard to pick out our successes, to know our strengths, and then to feel comfortable talking about it. I think it's something that's quite prevalent, particularly here. that we want to fit in as well. In our current society, there's you don't want to be a tall poppy because you want to fit in. So I think a lot of that plays into, well, I don't want to talk about my successes or come across as big-headed because then I'll stand out. And we're desperate to fit in and be the same as everybody else and be liked by everybody as well, which can play into this as well.
So you've sort of gotten out there in more ways than one. You've written a couple of books, and I just want to focus a little bit, if we can, on Like a Girl. And this book is all about you and uncovering your brilliance and thriving at life. And it's a guide to unlocking the female potential. Can you share with us a little bit about what inspired you to write the book, even the process of going through the book? Because quite a lot of people have this notion that one day I'm going to write a book, and that's where it ends. They just keep thinking about it. So maybe just walk us through, the germination of the idea, how you write, how you got through it, and how you actually expose yourself so that other people can learn from your lessons.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. You're right, Jordan. A lot of people feel like they've got a book in them, but getting it out of them is the problem. That's the big challenge. And I think for me, when I look at my first book, I didn't ever intend to be an author. I was traveling the world. I'd left the corporate world. I'd taken a year out to discover, well, if that's not going to be my career, what is? What do I love? How do I live my life? All the big questions that you get when you turn 30. And so I started blogging. And eventually, over the course of a year, I'd written enough blogs that somebody said to me, well, you've practically written a book. And that's where the idea came from. And I thought, okay, I'll put all these blogs together, organize them in chapters, tweak them a little, add some research, and there we go. There was a book. But it was my first book, so it was a lot of trial and error. So when the opportunity came around for a second book, I thought, okay, this is my chance now to put into practice all the things I've learned, the things that I'd do differently second time around. And I got this passion as well to write something that was much more focused at women and much more focused in empowering us to be our best. And so that's what gave rise to Like a Girl. And I was lucky enough to be able to sit and write it full time. So it took me about a year to do that. And I thought that, I always used to think that writing the book would be the hardest part. And then, of course, you get into the bit where you've got to sell it, market it, speak about it, and all this, like the business side of writing a book, which was such a massive learning curve for me. But one I've been really grateful for. And that's really what's given rise to my business in the form that it's in today, and allows me to go and do the things that I do, whether it be with individuals in the community or with business groups. And so, yeah, I think everybody does have a book in them. And the quickest way to write it is just to start. I mean, everybody does it differently. Some people will write 100 words a day every day for a year. Other people will only write once a week and sit down and do, a good 5 or 6 hour block. So it's personal preference. But for me, I like to dedicate myself to my writing. When I'm writing, that's what I'm doing, and I'm not doing too much else. But I do tend to find that then I start craving external company and socialization, and you can spend too much time by yourself as a writer too. So it's an important balance.
It is. The balance is always, especially in this busy time frame and stuff, trying to keep focused. Or do you have like ways that you, particularly working from home, where you don't find yourself in the fridge again after breakfast, and your house is cleaner than ever? There are a lot of distractions. Do you have any tips for people to kind of keep them focused?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm one of these people that loves working from home, and I'm quite disciplined about the work that I do because I love doing it. So I don't struggle too much in that respect, but we all tend to procrastinate about our work at some point. And writing a book is a great way of harnessing your procrastination skills. So there is always a load of washing that you can find to put on, or chocolate in the fridge. I think for me, it's about knowing where our inspiration is at, and knowing that we're not always on form. We're not always on fire and capable of writing brilliance. And some people will say, well, just sit down and write anyway and see what comes. But sometimes for me, if I'm hitting that wall and I'm just not feeling inspired that day, it's about doing something else. And that might be cooking the dinner, or it might be going for a walk. It might actually not be doing any work at all. And I'll often find when I do that stuff, because it ignites my creativity in a different way, I'll start to get ideas, and whatever block I was experiencing around my writing tends to shift away at that point. So it's a balance between being disciplined and getting it done, but then also kind of being in tune with your own flow and knowing what you need each day. So it's not realistic, I think, for us to expect that even as a full-time writer, you sit down and you write every day and it's always brilliant and you're always going to be inspired, because that's just not how life works.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, there are days that if you left me in front of the computer terminal and said you're going to write 1,000 words, even 100 words, and I'm not in that zone, forget about it. I'm gonna, you'll find me sort of eaten by dogs, because I just, it ain't coming, you know.
Yeah,
So it's
totally.
interesting. And I think just in a lot of the work that you do, you talk about, and you understand it's horses for courses. It's like different people will reach for different tools, will reach for different techniques and things. And some of that you must bring that into your, not only your books and your talks, but your coaching as well. So do you have like particular clients that you work with, or are there age groups? Is it all women? Do you have any men? I mean, tell me a little bit about how you bring in that being people's individual best
Mm.
into your coaching.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because generally it is all the same content. It's the stuff that comes out of the book that I write about that ends up being in blogs, that then ends up being in videos, that then ends up being in workshops, ends up being part of the coaching one-to-ones. But it's just a different way of delivering that content. My coach likens it to rearranging the flowers. You have a beautiful vase of flowers and you can rearrange them in lots of different ways, and you can have mini bouquets and all that sort of stuff. So and it's about what the individual needs as well. So you're right, every individual that comes to us is looking for something different or has a specific issue to solve. And it might even be the same topic. So all of the people that come to me to talk about imposter syndrome, generally they have a different element each within that. It's all imposter syndrome, but for some it's about their job, others it's about their relationship, it's about a specific skill or something from their childhood. And so it tends to vary. A lot of the people I work with are women. Although I have worked with men. A lot of the work that I do has been informed by my books, and that's been interesting because it started off in line with the first book. It started off being a lot about mindfulness, resilience, our wellness, that element of being our best, and has gravitated more towards imposter syndrome because of the trending topic that's become, probably at the same time that the book was launched, and how that resonated with the general public as well. So I do a lot of work with businesses, particularly with their women in leadership groups, because this is a big part of us helping get more women into leadership by helping them see that they can and believe that they can and uncover their potential. Because let's face it, if you don't believe you're capable of the role, you're not going to apply. And that's possibly one of the reasons why we don't have enough women around the leadership tables.
Mm. And we know that diversity improves the creativity, improves productivity, it improves the end result. So it's not just about evening the odds and boys and girls. It is very much good business sense to be having coaching in an organization. And personally, are you finding that individuals now are approaching you more as a coach, or is it still within that that umbrella? And what would you potentially say to someone who's kind of thinking about it? Because coaching it's a buzzword up there. It's very, very popular, but people might be a bit nervous or not really know what it's all about. So maybe just share with me a little bit more on that personal coaching side.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether you've found this, but I think coaching over the last kind of decade or so, it's really changed, particularly in the workplace. So I think now it's seen, if you want to get on at work, if you want to progress, if you want to develop your career, a coach should be part of that, because it's somebody outside of your organization that doesn't have kind of a predetermined view of you or your organization or what you should be doing. So it's an unbiased neutral, if you like, with the skills to help you put a mirror up to yourself and get the best out of you and the things that you might not be able to see. Whereas I think if you go back kind of 10, 20 years, particularly in the workplace, when people hired coaches, it was because there was a performance issue, or you need help, or you're not good enough in some way. And so that's really come 360 in terms of how we use coaching in the workplace. And you're right, you said before, the businesses will only invest in this stuff if it's good for their bottom line. And it totally is. I mean, we're not doing this because it's a nice to have. We're doing this because it makes a difference to our organizations, and it makes our organizations flourish to have that diversity at the top table, and regardless of gender, and help people see the potential that lies within them, because then we're getting the most out of our talent that exists in our organizations.
That's it. Helping people one-on-one within businesses. They're really powerful ways of helping people be the best that they can be. And one of the things that I loved about, when I first met you, was one of these, the way that you give back. So you're not just doing the one-on-one and the organizational stuff. You're also doing these events, the Women Supporting Women events, and you've ran them now all across New Zealand, and they're not for profit. And the people that go there. I mean, I've been to one of your events, and it's amazing the vibe. You had there were women there, and you had encouraged people to bring their daughters and young people, and there was so much love and um, still pointy business stuff that was coming out. What made you start to want to even do Women Supporting Women events? And when's the next one, and how can people go?
It's a real evolution how that sort of has taken legs and just run itself. So giving back is a massive part of what I do. I'm one of these people that, whilst we need to pay our bills and I run a business, I get a great sense of satisfaction in helping others. My grandmother and my mother are two of the most kindest, compassionate people that I know, and I guess in the gene pool that's passed down, because I don't get the same sense when I'm doing things for money. I don't get the same sense of satisfaction as when I'm doing it for good. And of course, you can do it for both as well. So for me, it was about how I give back to the community. I do a lot of work with Dress for Success, an organisation that help women get back into the workforce. So I do a lot of events for them, but also give them free tickets to my events. And it kind of grew from this point of, how can I put a massive event on that is big enough that you can sell tickets to pay for things like venue and catering, but is also going to still hold that space for people that ordinarily can't afford to buy tickets, that they can still access this stuff. And it was twofold, because at the same time, I'd been talking to a lot of other female speakers who, I guess it resonated for me. When you're new in this journey, you have a message you're passionate about that you want to share. Often you're quite good at doing that too, yet you're sitting waiting to be invited to events. And a lot of people don't know you until you can get in front of these events. So it's kind of a vicious cycle in that respect. So I thought, here's a great opportunity to provide a platform for other women that have got a message to share, to speak and to practice their speaking, but also to be noticed, to be seen, and to share their message, which helps them, but also inspires the audience as well. And so that's how Women Supporting Women was formed. It was about supporting the women that come along, but also, because you've got so many women in a room, being able to use that as a platform to support women in business. So that might be speakers that come along and speak. We support a charity each time we do one of these events, a different one each time. So people bring donations and the charity talk about the work that they do. And it's often a charity that also empowers women. And then I went one step further than that and had expo type stands where women in business could come and showcase their business to this room full of people at the same time. So it's all in keeping with, this is how women help support each other. And when groups of women get in a room like that, great things happen. So it's sort of grown into this massive, I thought it would be a one-off, and it went so well that we did it again in Wellington. And then there was the call for let's do this outside of Wellington. So we've started to make that happen as well. In fact, we just had the Auckland one a few weeks ago.
And any other in the pipeline in terms of those events?
Yeah, so the next one now Auckland has been and gone. Christchurch is the next one that we're looking at organising. So no date yet, but soon will be. And then obviously in 2020 we'll look at doing it all again.
Fantastic. I know that that I had met a number of different women, and everyone, I guess, even just by showing their commitment to want to learn, to attend the event, you're already talking about a different cohort or a different group of people. They're ready and willing to hear different messages. It's that whole, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And I remember being there was a question that one of the ladies asked. She was saying, because a lot of the speakers at the session that I had gone to were people who had left the corporate jobs and were doing things on their own, were doing more social oriented businesses, and she stood up in the audience, and you'll probably remember, and she said, well, this is all well and good, but I don't want to leave my job. I don't
Mm.
want to start a business. I don't want to be a coach. I don't want to do social things. I want to make change from within. And it was I remember it really resonated for me, because I was a corporate, and I mean, I've stepped away from that life a lot, to be doing more of the, the self coaching and the writing and all of that stuff. But I thought, absolutely, it's so critical that we offer support within those organizations for people who are passionate about staying within an organization. Because let's face it, I mean, especially in Wellington, government organizations, the better those government organizations can be, the better the citizenry gets services and products and things. And so, one of the things that you've talked about is how you bring out whatever is passionate about those individuals. And so it really is quite a spectrum, isn't it? I mean, are you working with people that are, hardcore, bottom line, all the way down to the Mother Teresas that want to, go off and build wells in foreign countries?
Yeah, oh, totally. And look, the way I see it, it's about tapping into our potential, but also aligning with our values. And that can be, we can have the same values and express them very differently. So we might have a value of compassion, which might mean that we go to foreign countries and build wells, but it also might mean that we are a compassionate leader in a government organization. And both of those are our values that matter to us, and we're able to display them, but within our current world. So by no means do we have to all leave the corporate world and start our own business to be happy. But the main part of that is we leverage our strengths, we align to our values, we do what makes us happy. And of course, that still exists within our corporate jobs as well for many people, particularly if
Absolutely.
you've got, I was thinking of those women leaders that want to bring others along on this journey, and they are really the shining lights and the role models for the leaders of the future. So it's really important we have those throughout all of our organizations, government and corporate as well.
Now, what kind of projects are you working on now? And are there, is there anything that we can expect to find, eagerly in the future? What sort of, what are you reading? What's sort of sharpening your saw right now?
Oh, I love learning, and a lot of that's been by trial and error since I've started my own business. So I'm constantly learning, particularly about the business side of things. Um, Constantly learning stuff in that space. I think I'm not actually reading any books at the moment. I am writing another one. I've just started writing my third, so it's very early days yet. In terms of what that's going to look like and when that's going to be out. But I've started to throw a few ideas down on paper, which is always the first, that starts the ball rolling. Once you've got that bit done, the book soon follows. So yeah, that's kind of keeping me busy at the moment, and the research into that. But I think when I think about books that I love, books that I recommend to other people, for me, it's always been Brene Brown's a massive influence for me, as she is for many. Her TED Talks, her book. But when I first read her Gifts of Imperfection, which is quite an old book of hers, it really opened my eyes to this whole, oh wow, we don't have to be perfect. And if we're not perfect, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with us. That was the first time I remember feeling that for myself. That was quite powerful.
Mm.
Quiet as an introvert. Quiet, the book by Susan Cain, that's a bestseller. Yeah, I think amazing for helping introverts see the strengths behind introversion as well. And I just recently went to spend a weekend with Dr. Libby Weaver, and I was talking to her about one of her early books, Rushing Woman Syndrome, when I was still in the corporate world and suffering from stress and busyness and burnout. One of her that book, The Rushing Woman Syndrome, I actually got her to sign it for me whilst I was there with her, was an eye-opener for me in terms of self-care and resilience, and that there is another way. We don't have to rush through life like it's one big emergency and be mired in this busyness to be successful. So they're probably the things, I think, for me, that I often find myself recommending to others from a book perspective.
Oh, that's good. It's so important, and sharing and learning different ways of even the self-care side of things. I mean, what do you do to sort of just unwind, unplug? We were joking around about surfing and that, but what is it that you do to sort of unplug? Do you?
There's a number of things, and this self-care for me, it's something I teach now as part of the Thrive workshops that I do. It's been such a like a non-negotiable really for me, but such a massive turning point, because self-care was always something I thought was a nice to have when I get time, kind of, last on your own list, that kind of stuff. And then when I did sort of eventually burn out, I realized that this is the foundation from which we build. If we can't get our self-care right, and if we don't prioritize that, we're never going to be able to be our best or achieve what we're capable of doing, because we're just too tired and exhausted all the time. So for me, it looks like meditation. It's something I do every day, sometimes only 5 or 10 minutes. It doesn't take me long, but that gives me the clear mind and the calmness to be able to face the chaos of the day. Yoga, moving my body, whether it's out in nature walking or yoga, it's important for me to move my body, getting enough sleep, the basics around health. But I also, for me, I think particularly if you run your own business, this is true. It's taking time out of, even though you might love to do it, spending too much time doing it and taking time out of that. So I'm actually heading off to Australia in a couple of weeks on a yoga retreat where there is some surfing as well, incidentally. It's in Byron Bay. So yeah, doing things like that where you get a break and a change of scenery, that's really important for my sanity and my self-care as well.
It's funny. My daughter said yesterday. I said I'm in the middle of finishing off my second book of a trilogy, the manuscript, and it's literally the next few days. Got to get it to the editor, and I said I feel like I want to stay up tonight and just polish off the end of it. And she said, Mom, why would you do that? She says, you're just going to get, you're going to be tired tomorrow. You might finish it today, but you're going to have a really crappy sleep. And then tomorrow you're going to be behind the 8 ball. And I'm sitting there out of the mouths of babes, but it's so true. We're so excited and so passionate about things that sometimes we forget to breathe. It's literally that silly. And you kind of slid it in, and I'm going to kind of, I'm going to call you on it a little bit. You said you burnt out, and the reason I want to just sort of just touch on this just a little bit. I don't want to, sort of open up old wounds and things. I just think it's important that other people might hear, see, listen, some cues, some triggers, some things that might say, hey, actually, everything's not okay. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what happened?
Yeah, of course. It was a multitude of things for me. Yes, I was in the corporate world and I was very busy, and I was in this space of the busier I was, the more successful I became, both in my career and outside of it. So that meant working long hours, lots of meetings, lots of staying away from home. I was running a team at the time, traveling all over New Zealand. That was part of it, but it wasn't all of it by no means. So yes, there was the busyness side of it and the stress from a work point of view, which I think a lot of us normalize these days and go, well, that's just the way it is when you've got a busy, high-powered job, which I don't believe. I don't think it has to be this. There are a lot of people that are CEOs and high-powered people that don't have to be busy and stressed out and burnt out. But for me as well, it was a life thing. So I was living a life that wasn't in an accordance with my values. I didn't even know what my values were. I was in a relationship I'd outgrown, but the relationship was one that I'd emigrated with this person from the UK. We'd been together for 7 years. It was one of those things that it was my comfort zone. It was all I'd known. So similarly with my career, I'd spent 15, 20 years in that space, working towards that moment. So for me, it was a lot of this kind of feeling trapped. But in terms of the symptoms that were coming up and what I now look back on and recognize as burnout, constantly getting sick, constantly about to be having a cold or getting headaches, just being so tired, even when you sleep. I could have, on the weekends, I generally slept for 12 hours and I still woke up feeling exhausted. And it was just that feeling of hitting a brick wall, being close to tears a lot, losing tolerance with pretty much everyone around you. Those kind of things that when you spot that stuff, you know that all is not well. But a lot of the time for us to change, there's that saying that the cost of standing still sometimes needs to exceed the cost of facing your fear and getting out of your comfort zone for you to make that change. And that was true for me. So it had to get to that point for me to say, this is not how it's supposed to be and this needs to be different. And then to start looking at what that was. So that involved me leaving the corporate world, leaving my relationship, and just working out who it was that I was and what I needed to be, but in a way that was more in line with my values, figuring out what they were, and living a life that I felt was more authentic, as opposed to one that I thought everybody else wanted me to be or see, or what the rest of society was doing.
So was there a tipping point, or did you just sort of run out of puff so much that, you know, the cortisol had taken over and look, I ain't got anything else, you know? And was there a point where you said, you know what, this is the day? Was it
Mm.
like that?
It was more gradual than that, but there is one particular moment where I remember almost like a flick of a switch. So there was a lot of gradual stuff, you know, like an increased consumption of wine on a Friday afternoon as a way of coping with the working week. That I'd put on 10 kilos over the course of that year. I was quite unhappy in myself, but then it was actually the day of my birthday. I was just turning 31, and I'd finished my job. I'd gone to the gym, and then I was going to go home for a birthday dinner. And I was at the gym doing a step class in the middle of Les Mills. And as I stepped off the block, my knee gave way and I just collapsed into a heap on the floor. And I used to play soccer when I was younger, and I've got a history of knee problems, and my cruciate ligament had re-ruptured in the middle of this step class. And I sat on the floor and sobbed. And I realized that it wasn't even because my knee was that painful, that sore. It was more just because of my life, and like this analogy that, you know, my knee collapsing represented everything else was crumbling around me. And that was the point where I guess I realized, if there's a moment I can look back on now and say that was the catalyst, it probably was that. And because it was my birthday as well, and probably the end of a year where I'd been thinking, this isn't right, this is not how it's supposed to be, there needs to be another way. And of course that was my body's way of telling me, you know, now you're going to spend a week on the sofa not being able to move, you've got a lot of time to think about what's next.
That's right. You have your self-imposed quiet time for Jess to figure out where to next. And
Yeah.
I think it's really trying to get you know, understand the language and hear what our bodies are saying. Like you said, you know, it was probably a year in the making of, you know, tapping. Hey, this ain't right, girl. You know, and what next? What next? What next? And quite often it takes a colossal event or something that, you know, to say, hey, wake up and take notice. So Jess, I mean, I just want to sort of, we're kind of coming to the end here, but a couple of things. You'd mentioned before where you were blogging, that kind of turned into a book, and you know, that how important it is for to chip away at some of your goals and those sorts of things. The whole technology, I'm a little bit older than you are, so we're slightly different generations. The whole role of technology, the way that people are interacting nowadays, it is so distant. You know, coaching allows you to get a little bit more one-on-one. You've got that more human contact. I just wonder whether you've got a point of view on how we deal with all this technology, the whole social media, you know, how many likes you have. And now increasingly even in business, it's about how many clicks you have. And I'm constantly telling the kids, you know, that doesn't mean anything. But then in a business sense, of course it means something. So how do you know, what's your perspective, your point of view on this whole technology, personal relationships, human contact, that side of things?
Oh, it's a massive thing, eh? And it's still pretty, in terms of how it's evolved, and that has been so fast. It's still pretty early in that we haven't seen the full effects yet. It's like we're undergoing a massive experiment on humans at the moment around how this will impact us, particularly our social relationships. And I think with technology, I mean, it is brilliant, and I think it's less about the technology and more about our relationship with it, because I think we've taken something that has the potential to help us and be amazing, but the way we relate to it or the way we use it can be quite destructive. And I think it's the same when we look at our food and our money and all the things that came into our developed world and came in as, this is great. Then our human tendencies got the better of us, and we tend to overindulge in all of this stuff. Technology is the same. And I think for me, I've gotten to a point now, it's critical for my business. And yes, you know, we do measure ourselves on clicks and likes, but I think in my mind, if somebody's got lots of clicks and likes, it's because they're good at playing the game. They know how the algorithms work, as opposed to a reflection on their self-worth or how successful their business is quite a lot of the time. And for me, I've got to a point now where, although it's critical for my business, I've also found that what's critical for my sanity and my mental health is taking a day off. Normally it's one day a month where I just don't touch any device at all. And that's my laptop, my mobile, TV, when we're putting Netflix on, all of that stuff. And I literally don't look at a screen. And I notice the difference in myself when I'm not doing that. And then anyone can go a day without technology. I mean, it's funny because you notice how reliant you are on it when you can't order an Uber and things like that because you've not got your device on. But not having it with you and having it switched off in a drawer for a day is so liberating. And your mind gets a lot more clear and calm as a result. But you also free up so much time in your day. So I think it's just about that balance, that we use the technology because it does have some great things it can do for us. And for me, with family on the other side of the world, it's the way I see my nephews growing up. It's the way I connect with my mom and dad through Skype and Facebook and things. So it has its place. But I think how we relate to it and how we use it, we need to be in control of that more and more aware as well of the impacts, I think, because it is so habit forming. And we're seeing, particularly in our younger generation, if you need to pick up that phone every few seconds and check if you've got a like to feel worthy of being in this world, then that's a problem. So it's how we use it and the impact it's having on us.
That's really good advice. And that unplugging. And a couple of weeks ago, well, maybe a month or so ago, I went on a bit of a silent retreat. A friend of mine had a place in Wairarapa, and I was 10 days off technology, and I wrote more in that 10 days than, and I did yoga every day, and I didn't speak. So I didn't say, honestly, it's life changing. And I feel like that's got to be part of my at least biannual or maybe every 6 months thing, because it changed. I didn't even realize how much of an impact it has. But as you say, we have to set some boundaries and use it well. With people being across the world, it's a great way to stay in touch. But when somebody gets annoyed with you because you haven't responded to their text and it's been 3 minutes, maybe we need to rethink that part.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So Jess, as we close up, I just wonder if there's any sort of last advice, a strategy, something that you could share with the viewers about living authentically and how they might be happier in life. Is there one sort of thing? I know it's a combination of a lot of things, but what one thing might you sort of leave people with that are interested in wanting to live authentic lives?
Oh, I think the biggest thing for me when I look back at my own journey has been figuring out who I was, first of all, because you need to know what that is to connect with it. So it's all very well to say, live your authentic life. But for a lot of us, we don't know what that looks like, especially when we're so wrapped up in the busyness, distracting ourselves from the fact that we're not currently living an authentic life, that it takes a while sometimes to figure that out and to press pause, get the perspective, work out what our values are, align to what they are. And I think once we've got to that point where we've figured it out, it becomes an acceptance thing. And this was massive for me. I mean, when I went through the whole process of leaving my relationship, coming out, right to sort of where I find myself now 5 years later, about to marry my partner. It's, when I look at that, a huge amount of that, it took me 2 decades to get to a point where I even realized that I was gay, let alone wanted to act on it. And I think for me, it was about me being able to accept that myself first before I worried about whether anybody else would accept that. And ironically, once you are living authentically in you, that people feel that resonates with so many people. And there's not many people that turn away from that when you are being yourself, when you're authentically you. And it's such an easier place to be. I realized that the couple of decades leading up to that, the reason life was so hard was because I had no idea of who I was and what I wanted. And I was petrified that if that was different to what I currently had to be, people wouldn't love me. But of course, it's that whole cliche. Once you love yourself, it's a lot easier for others to love you too. And the same applies for self-acceptance. And so that would be, from an authenticity point of view, that would be my thing for anybody out there. Get in mind who it is you want to be, what's important to you. And once you align to that and accept that, everybody else gets on board too.
That's great advice. That's really, really important and surprisingly easier going than trying to not be your authentic self.
Definitely. Yeah,
So
definitely.
Jess, people that I'm sure they're going to listen to this and say, okay, I want a copy of the book. I want to coach with Jess. I want to, go to these events, the next one in Christchurch. What's the easiest way to get in touch with you? How can I buy a book? Share with our viewers, what next? How can they connect with you?
So social media, we've talked about technology, social media. So Facebook, LinkedIn, I have a YouTube channel as well with over 50 free videos on it. So they're good places to connect. Everything is on my website. So I've got a free resource page dedicated to imposter syndrome on there. I've also got information about the books. You can buy the books through the website. You can book coaching through the website. So that's the best place to go. And that's www.jessstuart, which is stuart.co.nz.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your time with us, Jess. It's been fantastic getting to know you a little bit better, a little bit more about your work, about your book, and some tips about being authentic. That's fantastic. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you. Nice to chat.
So if you have a story that you'd like to share that will inspire others, we'd love to hear from you. Until we meet again, I'm Dr. Jordan Alexander, encouraging you to join the UBU revolution. Let's all live a life we don't need a vacation from.